Morning guys, it's Blackie for Shaman's Forge Bushcraft. This is in response to a subscriber of mine sent me a request to iterate a little bit more about the tomahawk. I've recently included it in a video called Bushcraft Axes, but he wanted to hear a little bit more about the tomahawk itself, and so that's what this is. Okay, the tomahawk has played an important role in the history of man. It has been a dual-purpose weapon and tool, interchange. Today, the nation of France owes itself a lot to what today we'd call a tomahawk. It was a fighting axe that could be thrown as well as fought in hand-to-hand combat. And so what these guys would do is they'd carry 4 or 5 of them on them. They were shock troops. They'd line up in front of the line where the enemy forces were, and at the command everybody would hurl a hawk, start running, hurl another hawk, and then pull 2 to fight. Well, the guy who's sitting there defending, you got 100 tomahawks coming through the air at one time, plus you got some guys skipping them on the ground, so you're trying to duck and dodge all of these hawks coming at you and bouncing up at you, and then zoom, there he is. And with that hook on a hawk, he would grab, pull the shield down, whack. Hook, pull the shield up, whack. Weapon. But it also served a very useful purpose as a tool. Now, what's the difference between a hawk and a hatchet? A hatchet normally has a fairly heavy head for its size and a fairly short handle. It's relying upon weight to do the job. A hawk is a relatively small head and a relatively long handle, and much like a machete, it relies on speed to do the job. Now, this is a traditional tomahawk. This is a hand-forged tomahawk that's been mined for longer than I care to remember, but it was hand-forged to be a rendezvous living history tomahawk. The main body of the hawk is made up of wrought iron and the bit is steel. The metal is beat out flat, folded around a mandrel, thus forming the eye, and then a piece of hardened steel, a file or something, was put into it, and it was all forge welded together. Thus, I know you can't see it, but all them hammer marks. Now, this style of hawk dates from the colonial era, 1750s and etc., and was the preferred type of weapon. Now, this round eye held on an unusually long amount of time, well into the 1800s. It was an American design to make the eye different shaped. Disadvantage to this was the hawk handle would want to twist, especially in combat where you're doing a lot of hitting and yanking and torquing on it. Eventually the handle would work its way down or come out. But the advantage was, with this round eye, it was very easy to fabricate a handle out of any straight piece of hardwood. Made it easy to fix in the field. Quite often when you went to a trade post and bought a hawk, you just bought the head and you made your own handle. Now, this brings us up to modern times. Why do we have tomahawks today? Okay, I'm about to give you a radical theory. Back in the 1950s, Walt Disney released a movie called Davy Crockett. I know, don't laugh, but hold on, bear with me a minute. It was such a huge influence on the baby boomers that coonskin caps and flintlock guns and everything were just everywhere. Now, those kids later became the National Muzzleloading Rifle Association, the Civil War reenactors, etc. In my 30 years of being around reenactment, almost everybody I've ever talked to, when I say, what got you into this? And it was either the movie Jeremiah Johnson or Davy Crockett. It was just an unbelievably huge influence. And when we got into Vietnam, we had a curious problem. Ammo would be delivered quite often by helicopter on pallets, and it would have these steel bands anchoring it to the pallet a lot of times. We had to run out there and cut those bands. Well, the issue thing you had was a bayonet, or this clumsy, almost blunt issue hatchet that's been around since World War II days, that was better as a splitting wedge than it was anything else. And so this became issue. Now this is a Vietnam tomahawk. Note, relatively small head, relatively long handle. Spike. Spike was for grabbing debris, chunk, and dragging, or combat. This hook right here from the Franks and the Frankish hawks for hooking the top of a shield and pulling it down, for hooking an arm or a leg and pulling it. Relatively thick, blunt edge for cutting through steel bands on these cargo straps. Remember I said Davy Crockett? A lot of those guys remembered playing with tomahawks as kids, and so these things didn't stay with the ammo pallets. These things ended up being carried off and used in combat for cutting, for building for quick shelters, for chopping through things and obstacles, for harpooning and dragging, and for use as a close combat weapon when things got real nasty, especially in the dark. Now, today you can still find these hawks. There's a lot of guys in Afghanistan toting these type of hawks, and they're a good, useful tool slash weapon. Now, this is the one I showed you in my video recently, and this is a cold steel hawk, trail hawk. It has a hammer pole back here, very handy for driving tent stakes and things you got to pound on, which there are a lot of things you can use. Knock something into place, whatever, out here in the woods. Relatively small head, relatively thin. That big eye that I like because I can fabricate this handle in the field. Now, for chopping, the handle is long and gets a lot of speed on the impact. So, like a machete, whack. It has a relatively small cutting edge, but it's very easy to carry, slid in, and it can be lighter than, say, a hatchet or small axe, and still do the same job. Now, combat. These are used in modern day combat, and the way we normally think of it, a chopper, a basher. I bet you never thought of this for up close. I did some studying, some training when we were doing living history about tomahawk fighting techniques. And there was a discussion about a battle that took place in the Carolinas where it was at night and it was up close and personal, and how the individual who did this thing talked about that the Indians had got so close abreast, I mean they were so close, that he found swinging the hawk was too awkward, so he turned it and slid down and used it as a stick with a slasher. Actually, it kind of makes sense when you start playing with it. Use it like a nightstick, whack. Use this like a slasher, whack. Up close, really close. We don't have the room to swing this. For probably 2,000 years, we've had something like this. Now they have been hand axes, celtids, some sort of green limb heated or shaved thin and bent over, a stone axe head and then wrapped with rawhide. The Iceman had a copper axe that looked a lot like this. It was just set into a head that we'd call a tomahawk. They're very useful field gear in both the defense for our troops and for standard bushcraft. Now for chopping, I like the hammer pole, because if I'm trying to split something, I can use it to baton. If I'm trying to like splint a stave down straight, I can hit it and take with a hard maul and work my way down and split kind of cleanly. If I'm just busting up firewood for kindling, this is it. If I'm having to pound a lot of stakes, or if we're building like a half shelter or something like that in a remote area, I like this. The handle is easily fabricated, and as I showed in my other video, I can easily slide the head off and use it as a tool. So it's a multi-function tool. Could I use it as a weapon? Absolutely. Could it be used for self-defense? Absolutely. Just a great tool, guys. I'm sure I could spend the next 3 hours showing you how to chop, but you already know that. The tomahawks that are available today, cold steel makes a really good Vietnam one if you're wanting a weapon. It's got the spike. Disadvantage to it, you can't hammer it into anything. It's more of a weapon than it is the tool. It'll do the tool job, but it's more of a weapon. This is a tool that does a weapons job. It'd be my first choice for a field kit. Now, if you look around on some sites, you're going to find this type as well. I personally prefer a forged hawk over a cast hawk. Cast hawks are very good for throwing. I prefer forged for its edge holding ability in an actual field hawk. You'll see a lot of throwing tomahawks. They're not known for holding an edge well. They're known for being relatively soft so that the repeated impacts of throwing it won't bust them. If you're going to get into it for throwing tomahawks, and there's lots of tutorials on the web, invest in handles. Because these handles will break due to the shock of the hit, and this is unsupported, and it whips. And so the grain structure in here starts to divide out and bust. Eventually you'll throw it and it'll splinter through here. It can be a lot of fun. It can be used offensively like that, but that's the last ditch. You're getting rid of your weapon. Remember, the Franks had multiple hawks, several of them on them. So they opened the volley by throwing. But then when they closed, they had two for hand-to-hand. If all you've got is one throwing it, if you miss, if your target ducks, you don't have a weapon. I'd rather make them close and play with them like this, or choke up. Well, guys, I hope this gets you a better idea of the tomahawk and what its uses are. It'll do any job that a small camp axe would do in bushcraft. It can be a great tool for carving and field camp chores, etc., and it can be used as a good offensive weapon. I'm Blackie for Shaman's Forge Bushcraft. Wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.